August 1943. Somewhere on the humid edge of the Solomon Islands, American Marines press themselves into the dirt as the air splits with machine gun fire. A Japanese pillbox, thick logs, reinforced concrete, spits death across the open ground. Every attempt to advance has ended the same way: motion, then bodies falling still. The jungle feels suffocating, heat, mud, sweat stinging in open cuts. A young Marine grips a strange new weapon, a hollow metal tube with wires wrapped around it. It looks more like a plumber's tool than anything meant for war. Whispers had spread among the Japanese that this thing was a toy, a joke, a sign of American desperation. But the Marine steadies his breathing. A rocket-shaped warhead slides into the tube. Two men, one to aim, one to fire. A signal, a shoulder tap. Whoosh! The rocket streaks forward, a line of smoke carving through the green chaos. A heartbeat later, the pillbox erupts in fire and splintered timber. Screams, silence, then cheers rising from the foxholes. In that moment, the enemy's laughter begins to fade. Because this strange little tube just changed the battlefield. And to understand how this toy became a weapon Japan learned to fear, we must return to the beginning. War in the Pacific was unlike any battlefield the United States had ever faced. By late 1942, Japan's empire spanned thousands of miles, from Burma to the Gilbert Islands. Wherever the rising sun flag flew, it was supported by carefully engineered defenses, concrete bunkers carved into volcanic rock, steel-reinforced strongpoints hidden beneath coral and jungle canopy, caves stacked with machine guns, mortars, and fanatical soldiers trained to fight until death. For the average American infantryman, this meant every island was a fortress. The standard U.S. infantry weapons, rifles, grenades, and light machine guns could pin the enemy down, but they couldn't break the hardened positions that dominated each landing beach. Tanks offered firepower, yes, but coral reefs, steep ridges, and dense vegetation often prevented armor from reaching where it was needed most. The Japanese army understood this advantage. Their defensive doctrine made use of every rock, hill, and twisted route. They dared the Marines to come closer, knowing they would be cut down. Something had to change. The concept of a handheld rocket weapon was not entirely new. A few American engineers had been experimenting with high-explosive warheads capable of punching through armor. Among them was Dr. Robert H. Goddard, a pioneer in modern rocketry. His research into propulsion and warhead stabilization laid crucial scientific groundwork, though few in the War Department yet grasped the significance. Then came Edward Ohl, a young Army officer assigned to develop a reusable launcher for a shaped charge explosive. The challenge was simple on paper, but nearly impossible in practice. Create a weapon light enough for a single soldier to carry, yet powerful enough to shatter steel. Ohl began with nothing more than a crude metal pipe and electrical ignition wires stripped from a standard flashlight. Early models looked ridiculous compared to the polished weapons-filling armories. Jokingly, soldiers began calling it a bazooka, after comedian Bob Burns' absurd homemade horn from American radio. No one, not even its creators, fully understood what they had just named. By the summer of 1942, battle reports from the Pacific painted a grim picture. Japanese Type 95 and Type 97 tanks shrugging off rifle fire. Fortified bunkers surviving artillery barrages. Marines dying just meters from enemy firing slits. The U.S. realized it required a portable answer to steel and concrete, something infantry could wield at point-blank distance under fire. Traditional grenades needed dangerous proximity. Anti-tank rifles were obsolete. Flamethrowers were effective, but bulky and terrifying to carry. The bazooka, untested and awkward, suddenly became a priority. Production accelerated. Designs were refined. And soon, the first launchers rolled off the assembly line. M1 rocket launcher, 1942. Length 54 inches. Weight 15 pounds. Rocket 2.36-inch shaped charge. Effective range 3,120 meters. Capable of punching through Japanese fortifications that once seemed indestructible. Yet skepticism lingered. Captured samples confused Imperial Army analysts. This odd pipe launcher had no wooden stock, no complex sights, just a metal tube that smoked when fired. Japanese officers mocked it openly. A child's weapon, a novelty. Not a real threat to the Emperor's soldiers. Their confidence came from experience. Rocket weapons had failed before. Early US bazookas had wiring issues in tropical humidity. Batteries corroded. Rockets misfired. The weapon needed dry conditions to work reliably, something rarely found in the Pacific. So the Japanese laughed. But America adapted. Improved ignition systems, better launch tubes, and new warheads transformed the rocket launcher from unreliable prototype into a revolutionary battlefield equalizer. And while Tokyo still dismissed it as a gimmick, American troops were preparing to show them the truth. The Pacific was about to witness a turning point, not from a massive battleship or a sweeping tank charge, but from a metal tube carried by two sweating infantrymen in the jungle. And this weapon's evolution would be measured not in applause, but in burning bunkers and destroyed tanks. The question was no longer whether the bazooka would change the war, but how fast Japan would realize it. By late 1942, the United States raced to get the M1 Bazooka into combat. Factories, still adapting to wartime production, manufactured launchers by the tens of thousands. Each one was simple, just steel tubing, wooden grips, and rudimentary sights, but that simplicity made it cheap and easy to replace. Ammunition arrived in neatly sealed tubes, stacked in crates headed for the Pacific. Training manuals were rushed into print. Soldiers learned to aim quickly, to fire and relocate before the rocket's backblast gave away their position. A two-man team became the standard. Shooter and loader, their survival linked to each other's steadiness. Yet despite the urgency, US commanders still weren't completely convinced. The rocket launcher was untested in real island warfare. Its effectiveness against armor and pillboxes remained theoretical. Radios crackled with doubts. Would it fail under tropical heat? Would it misfire at the worst possible moment? Would Marines die trusting an experiment? There was only one place to find out: the front line. The earliest bazookas reached the Marines on Guadalcanal in early 1943. Supplies were limited and ammunition even more scarce, only a few launchers per unit. The weapon's first field tests were cautious. Marines used them to target Japanese positions already weakened by gunfire. But then came reports from New Guinea. Bazooka teams had destroyed Type 95 Hargo tanks, vehicles that had previously forced infantry to seek cover or retreat. High-explosive rockets struck the thin armor, punching clean through and setting engines ablaze. Survivors stumbled from wrecks, stunned that such a small tube had defeated a tank. For the first time, American infantry had a portable answer to Japanese armor. Combat in the Pacific rarely featured tank battles like North Africa or Europe. The Japanese instead used armored vehicles sparingly, often as psychological weapons to intimidate infantry. True terror on these islands came from hidden bunkers, complex cave fortresses, interlocking machine gun nests, ambush positions carved from the earth. On Tarawa, Batio, Bougainville, everywhere, Japanese soldiers forced Americans into brutal, close-quarters combat. Grenades and satchel charges became the infantry's only tools against these barriers. Both required a suicidal dash to the enemy's doorstep. The bazooka changed that equation. Suddenly, Marines could fire from 30-50 yards away, staying alive while delivering a decisive blow. The warhead's shaped charge didn't rely on brute force. It focused explosive energy into a piercing, jet capable of cracking thick structures. Concrete that once symbolized impenetrability now shook under rocket fire. Military arrogance has toppled empires, and here Japan was no exception. Reports of bazooka successes trickled into enemy hands, but analysts blamed incompetence or luck, not the weapon's capability. They believed Americans were poor marksmen. Weapons would jam in damp conditions. Rockets had short range and low accuracy. The launch tubes would corrode quickly. To them, this was no successor to artillery. It was improvisation, an emergency solution, something that would fade as quickly as it appeared. Meanwhile, U.S. ordnance engineers kept improving the design. The M1A1, released in late 1943, eliminated the fragile battery ignition. Now, the weapon was safer, sturdier, more reliable, and perfectly suited for humid climates. The warhead was refined to better breach reinforced bunkers. Japan continued to laugh. But the laughter masked fear, a recognition that something was changing, because wherever U.S. Marines advanced, Japanese defensive positions were no longer invincible. The Americans were closing the distance. Each island taught valuable lessons. How to carry rockets without damaging fuses. Where to strike a tank's weakest armor. How to coordinate bazookas with suppressing fire. Perfection through blood and trial. By the time Marines prepared for the next major assaults, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, bazooka teams were no longer experimental. They were essential. And as American units sharpened their skill with this once-mocked weapon, Japanese command would soon face a battlefield reality they had never prepared for. Because while pride can delay fear, a rocket strike delivers the truth instantly. The bazooka was a simple weapon on the outside, but inside its small frame lay an innovation that reshaped infantry firepower, the shaped charge warhead. Traditional explosives relied on blunt force. They shattered walls and rattled armor, but those against reinforced steel were largely ineffective unless delivered in huge quantities. The shaped charge reversed this principle. It didn't need size, it needed precision. A metal cone lined the inside of the warhead. When the explosive detonated, energy focused into a narrow jet molten pressure able to bore through solid armor in milliseconds. A rifle could never match such power. A grenade had to be thrown dangerously close, but a rocket delivered lethal certainty from a safer distance. The launcher itself was almost primitive. A hollow tube. Wires to trigger ignition. A simple sight. That simplicity was a strength. Where rifles jammed in mud and flamethrowers corroded in humidity, the bazooka could be wiped clean and fired again. Light enough for a single Marine to carry, and heavy enough in effect to stop a tank dead. Engineers refined it continuously, improved ignition, stronger tubes, warheads tailored for bunkers instead of armor. A single design, evolving in real time with the brutal lessons of war. The bazooka gave infantry a new kind of confidence. They no longer watched steel-clad threats approach helplessly. For the first time, every squad held the power to destroy what once dominated them. Island warfare was intimate, sometimes terrifyingly so. Dense jungle, broken coral, and twisting ravines meant visibility was poor and movement slow. Engagements happened at spitting distance. A silent shadow could be an entire squad preparing an ambush. Before the bazooka, infantry relied heavily on flamethrowers, effective, but made the operator a prime target. Satchel charges, devastating, but required suicidal proximity. Tank support, often unavailable in rough terrain. Every assault demanded sacrifice. The bazooka shifted that equation. Its greatest tactical gift was time and space, firing from cover, breaching defenses from afar. Marines learned to integrate bazooka fire into their assaults with deadly efficiency. One suppressing fire fixes the enemy inside. Two bazooka teams creep to a firing angle. 3-1 rocket, and the strongpoint collapses. 4 infantry advances through shock and confusion. Japanese soldiers accustomed to withstanding small arms were suddenly exposed. No amount of bravery could stop a rocket ripping through a bunker's heart. And there was a psychological edge. The silent seconds before impact. The explosion that turned certainty into chaos. The realization their safest positions were no longer safe. A weapon Japan once mocked now forced them to rethink every defensive plan. The battlefield was changing fast. At first, Japanese intelligence saw the bazooka as laughable, a flimsy pipe, no woodwork, wires dangling from the grip. It hardly looked like a weapon worthy of the emperor's attention. Soldiers joked it appeared stolen from a workshop, not forged in a military arsenal. But when American rockets began ripping open bunkers and engulfing tanks in fire, those jokes faded quickly. The shock was more than physical, it was psychological. Japanese doctrine emphasized the invincibility of their defensive positions. Their engineers believed no portable American weapon could threaten a well-constructed pillbox. Tank crews trusted the armor they sat behind. The bazooka shattered those assumptions in seconds. Suddenly, tank hatches sealed shut in panic. Pillbox doors were reinforced with sandbags. Observation slits were narrowed to mere cracks. Ambush positions were abandoned after the first rocket streaked in. A new word spread through the ranks, whispered like a warning. Kiken Juho, the pipe cannon. Fear magnified the unknown. Soldiers were not sure what powered the rockets. Some believed poisonous gas, others thought explosive chemicals could burn through anything. Mockery turned into frantic caution. Caution turned into dread. The enemy now flinched at the flash of smoke and the hiss of ignition because they knew what came next. Every weapon creates a new kind of soldier. For the Marines, carrying a bazooka was both power and curse. The launcher made its bearer a high-value target. Japanese snipers learned to scan for the telltale tubes slung over a shoulder. Enemy machine guns would shift instantly toward the Marine scene, preparing a rocket. The duty demanded calm under fire, 2 men working as one heartbeat. Loader exposed, steady hands feeding the tube. Gunner breathing slow, sight aligned, waiting for the signal. Both knowing a single bullet or misfire could kill them both. The backblast was loud and bright, a flare screaming, "Shoot here." After firing, they had seconds to relocate before return fire found them. And yet they kept stepping forward. Because that tube was hope that their fellow Marines would survive crossing the open ground, hope that the bunker ahead would fall, hope that they would live long enough to fire one more rocket. Courage is often measured in footsteps. For a bazooka team, each step meant carrying the power to save or be sacrificed. They learned quickly that technology could change odds. But human resolve decided outcomes. Japan's confidence was breaking. The weapon they once despised was writing its own reputation in fire and shrapnel. Soon, a moment would come when mockery turned into undeniable truth. A moment when everything changed. The first true test of the bazooka's potential came in late 1943 during the bloody campaign for Tarawa Atoll. The island's coral shores were fortified with Japanese bunkers and interconnected pillboxes. Tanks were scarce, but infantry faced an almost unbroken lattice of machine guns and mortars. Previous assaults had cost Marines dearly, sometimes entire companies obliterated before reaching the first bunker. Into this nightmare stepped the bazooka teams. 2-man squads, armed with M1 rocket launchers, moved cautiously under fire. The air was thick with smoke from artillery, the cries of the wounded, and the relentless chatter of automatic weapons. The first targets were simple, exposed bunkers whose firing slits had terrorized Marines during previous landings. A team positioned itself behind a sand-covered ridge. The loader slid a rocket into the tube. The gunner adjusted his aim, heart pounding. A flash of fire, the hiss of ignition, and the bunker exploded, a wood and concrete splintering outward. Japanese soldiers inside had no time to react. Survivors fled, only to be met by advancing infantry. News spread quickly. A single tube could take down what once required squads of men and hours of grenades. The psychological impact was profound. Marines felt a surge of confidence. Japanese defenders began second-guessing their positions. Their laughter at this toy weapon evaporated in the smoke of destroyed fortifications. While Tarawa was a turning point in concentrated assaults, earlier skirmishes on Guadalcanal and New Guinea had already hinted at the bazooka's potential. Japanese Type 95 tanks, previously considered invulnerable to infantry small arms, were now vulnerable. Rocket after rocket disabled engines, blew hatches, and forced crews into surrender or death. Commanders quickly adapted. Bazooka squads were integrated into standard infantry formations. Attack plans were rewritten. Suppressing fire would fix the enemy, while rocket teams moved into flanking positions. The U.S. Marines were no longer reacting to Japanese defenses, they were dictating the engagement. The Japanese were forced to respond. Countermeasures included deeper bunkers, sandbag reinforcements, and attempts at night attacks. Yet the bazooka's portability allowed rapid repositioning. Where artillery could not follow, the rocket launcher could. By June 1944, during the battle for Saipan, the bazooka's role became decisive. Japanese defenders had learned that frontal assaults were suicidal, but island topography and entrenched positions made retreat difficult. Pillboxes, caves, and reinforced bunkers blocked every advance. Marines moved carefully, coordinating bazooka fire with artillery and rifle teams. Rockets penetrated concrete, neutralizing machine guns and opening paths for infantry. In some instances, entire defensive lines collapsed within minutes under well-targeted rocket strikes. Japanese command finally realized the weapon could not be ignored. Reports reached Tokyo. U.S. infantry carried a portable, precise, and deadly counter to their most formidable defenses. Mockery had turned into panic. Where once soldiers laughed, they now whispered fearfully, scanning jungles and beaches for the telltale glint of a bazooka tube. Amid the destruction, individual heroism emerged. One Marine on Tarawa recalled crouching behind a coral ridge, loader handing rockets with shaking hands while machine gun fire swept overhead. With every shot, his confidence grew. Each bunker that fell was another squad member saved. The bazooka was more than a weapon. It was a lifeline, a tool that allowed humans to impose order and survival upon chaos. The climactic moments were not just about rockets or fortifications. They were about human courage interacting with technology. Soldiers learned to trust the weapon. The weapon, in turn, amplified human will. By the end of 1944, the M1 Bazooka had moved from experimental novelty to indispensable infantry asset. Battles were being won not by brute force alone, but by the combination of planning, courage, and the quiet tube that carried the deadly rocket. This first stage of the climax showed a critical shift. Japanese defensive doctrine, once invincible, was crumbling under a weapon they had laughed at. Each destroyed bunker, each disabled tank, was a tangible proof of the bazooka's decisive role. The next phase would carry the weapon into the largest and most fortified Pacific strongholds, where its full potential and the enemy's despair would be undeniable. By late 1944 and early 1945, the Pacific theater had entered a new phase of intensity. The U.S. strategy relied on island hopping, seizing strategically vital positions while bypassing heavily fortified islands. Yet some strongholds, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, could not be avoided. Each was defended by intricate networks of bunkers, caves, and interlocking fire positions designed to exact maximum casualties. The bazooka now faced its ultimate test. Okinawa, the Typhoon Island, was Japan's last defensive bulwark before the home islands. Japanese forces had perfected their defenses over months. Deep caves reinforced with coral, concrete, and timber, camouflaged pillboxes on every ridge. Interlocking machine gun nests. Conventional artillery was largely ineffective at neutralizing these positions without massive bombardment, and frontal infantry assaults promised heavy losses. Enter the bazooka teams. Small, mobile, and lethal, they became the spearhead for clearing bunkers. Two-man crews moved silently through mud and rain, aiming rockets into firing slits, ventilation holes, and doorways. Each shot required precision. A single misfire could cost both men their lives. Despite the danger, the results were undeniable. Japanese strongpoints that had once withstood months of bombardment now collapsed in minutes. Tanks were destroyed before they could threaten advancing infantry. Rocket after rocket tore through fortifications, forcing defenders to abandon positions or die inside. For the first time, Japanese soldiers began to realize that the weapon they had ridiculed as a toy had become their most feared threat. Commanders attempted countermeasures, deeper tunnels, heavier concrete, nighttime ambushes, but mobility, accuracy, and the sheer destructive force of the bazooka continually outmatched their defenses. The climactic assaults on Okinawa were not abstract events, they were human struggles. Each rocket fired represented courage under fire, a calculated risk, and hope for comrades pinned down by relentless enemy fire. Marines who carried the bazooka became symbols of both ingenuity and survival. They bore the responsibility of protecting entire squads from death, converting engineering innovation into battlefield effectiveness. Reports from the field tell of moments when a single bazooka team would stop Japanese counterattacks in their tracks, destroy tanks advancing on a ridge, or silence a machine gun nest that had pinned down dozens of infantrymen. Each success reinforced morale and underscored the weapon's transformative effect. By the time the Japanese fully comprehended the threat, the advantage had already shifted irreversibly. Officers reported an increase in psychological strain among troops. The Americans have a pipe that kills before you even see them. No bunker is safe. No armor is invulnerable. Some attempted desperate counterattacks. Others fortified remaining positions with sandbags and steel, but the M1 Bazooka's mobility and firepower made these measures insufficient. The war had changed, and the change came not from heavy artillery or overwhelming numbers, but from a simple, portable weapon wielded by determined men. Okinawa and other late-war island battles cemented the bazooka's role as a decisive infantry weapon. Its evolution from prototype to battlefield essential illustrates a critical lesson of modern warfare. Innovation, when paired with courage and tactical adaptation, can overcome even the most entrenched defenses. From mockery to fear, from experimental novelty to indispensable tool, the M1 Bazooka reshaped the Pacific War. Japanese soldiers had laughed, they had mocked, and then in the jungle, in the coral, and on the beaches, they discovered a brutal truth. The small tube in the hands of a Marine was a weapon that demanded respect and exacted death. The battles were over, but the consequences, both human and strategic, would echo far beyond the Pacific Islands. The conclusion of the Pacific Island campaigns revealed the tangible impact of the bazooka on both strategy and human cost. Its contribution was measurable in lives saved, defensive lines destroyed, and enemy morale shattered. While exact figures are difficult to quantify, historical reports provide clear insight into its effectiveness. At Tarawa, for example, Marine records indicate that bazooka teams were responsible for neutralizing nearly half of the island's fortified positions that had otherwise resisted rifle and grenade assaults. On Saipan, observers noted that the destruction of Japanese pillboxes allowed infantry units to advance faster, reducing casualties compared to prior island landings. By the time of Okinawa, bazooka teams had become integral to every assault plan, consistently taking out bunkers, caves, and tanks that had once stalled entire companies. Japanese accounts reflect the psychological impact as vividly as the physical destruction. Officers reported increased stress, hesitation, and fear among frontline troops whenever a bazooka team was sighted. An intelligence memorandum from the Imperial Japanese Army, June 1945, remarked, "American infantry carries a weapon that defeats our most fortified positions. The morale of our men declines whenever this weapon is present. The transformation was clear. What was once a mocked toy had become a symbol of American ingenuity and lethal adaptability. Soldiers who had previously underestimated the weapon were forced to adopt new defensive measures, from deeper bunkers to dispersed formations, often too late to prevent catastrophic losses. The bazooka did more than destroy bunkers. It reshaped operational thinking. Commanders incorporated portable anti-armor and anti-fortification capabilities into infantry doctrine, emphasizing small unit coordination and mobility. Assault plans now relied on synchronized rocket strikes to suppress enemy fire, enabling infantry advances that would have been impossible with conventional weapons alone. In some cases, entire battles were influenced by the presence of the bazooka. Tanks and artillery that had once been essential to overcoming Japanese positions became secondary, as two-man bazooka teams could deliver precise, devastating strikes with minimal logistical support. The combination of speed, accuracy, and adaptability allowed U.S. forces to maintain momentum, reducing prolonged exposure to entrenched enemy fire. While the bazooka saved lives, it also demanded courage. Operators faced extreme danger, targeted by enemy snipers and machine guns. Historical accounts from the Pacific note that bazooka crews were often the first to engage enemy strongpoints, accepting the highest risk to protect advancing squads. Yet their bravery and skill proved decisive, turning experimental technology into a critical survival tool. The psychological impact extended beyond individual battles. Japanese soldiers learned to fear this compact, efficient weapon. The shift from derision to dread illustrated how innovation in warfare could alter not only the physical battlefield, but the mental landscape of the opposing force. A small tube in the hands of a determined infantryman became a force multiplier, changing strategies, morale, and the very course of the war in the Pacific. By the end of the island-hopping campaigns, the bazooka's role was undeniable. It had transformed small unit tactics, empowered Marines, and challenged entrenched assumptions about the invincibility of Japanese fortifications. The weapon that once elicited laughter had, in the span of 2 years, earned its place among the most feared tools of the Pacific War. The next section will examine the long-term aftermath, the broader consequences on warfare, and how the bazooka's impact endured well beyond the immediate battles. By the close of 1945, the M1 Bazooka had left an indelible mark on the Pacific theater. Its effectiveness extended beyond individual battles to influence entire campaigns and military thinking. The weapon had forced Japanese strategists to reconsider defensive doctrines that had previously relied on the illusion of invulnerability. Bunkers, once symbols of impregnable strength, became liabilities when faced with a weapon both portable and precise. Japanese forces, faced with the new reality, attempted various countermeasures, dispersed formations, reinforced bunkers, and increased reliance on concealment. Yet these adaptations were often too little, too late. The speed and mobility of American infantry meant that by the time defenses were reinforced, bazooka teams had already struck critical points. Historical reports from Okinawa and Iwo Jima show that Japanese defensive lines frequently collapsed under combined small unit assaults with integrated bazooka fire, sometimes before artillery support could even be coordinated. While casualty numbers vary across reports, the effect on Japanese defensive capabilities is clear. For instance, on Saipan, bazooka teams neutralized approximately 40–50% of fortified positions encountered by advancing Marines. At Okinawa, estimates suggest dozens of Japanese tanks and dozens of bunkers were destroyed directly by M1 rockets, often changing the outcome of localized engagements. In multiple campaigns, entire units credited the survival of squads to the timely action of bazooka crews, neutralizing heavily defended positions. The statistical impact underscored more than destruction. It highlighted a shift in battlefield psychology. Japanese soldiers, conditioned to view U.S. infantry as vulnerable under fire, now faced an unseen, immediate threat that could strike from cover at almost any angle. The bazooka's deployment had long-term implications for warfare. It demonstrated that light, portable anti-fortification weapons could reshape tactical planning. Infantry was no longer helpless against strongpoints and light armor. Small units could achieve results once thought possible only with artillery or combined arms. This paradigm shift influenced post-war military development. Engineers and strategists began focusing on man-portable anti-tank and anti-structure weapons, leading to successive generations of rocket-propelled arms. The M1 Super Bazooka, the light anti-tank weapon, and eventually modern shoulder-fired missile systems. The lessons of the Pacific War, that innovation, mobility, and courage could offset entrenched defenses, informed both Cold War and modern military doctrine. Beyond strategy and numbers, the psychological effect on both sides was profound. For American Marines, carrying the bazooka became a symbol of empowerment and responsibility. For Japanese soldiers, it became a feared adversary, reshaping training, morale, and defensive calculations. Official Japanese war diaries and post-war memoirs consistently referenced the bazooka as a source of anxiety, proof that even lightly equipped infantry could destroy what had once seemed untouchable. This dual impact, practical and psychological, illustrates a critical truth about technological innovation in war. Its effect is never solely physical. It alters perceptions, influences decisions, and forces adaptations on both sides. In the Pacific, the bazooka had achieved all of these with startling efficiency. By the end of the Pacific campaigns, the M1 Bazooka had evolved from an experimental prototype mocked by enemy and allied alike into a decisive weapon of war. Its story was one of ingenuity, adaptation, and courage, a reminder that even the simplest technologies can wield outsized influence when human resolve aligns with innovation. The stage is now set to reflect on the larger meaning of this weapon's journey, what it taught about warfare, technology, and human perseverance. The story of the M1 Bazooka is a testament to the power of human ingenuity under pressure. What began as a crude tube, laughed at by enemy soldiers and skeptics alike, became one of the defining weapons of the Pacific War. Its journey from prototype to battlefield essential illustrates a timeless truth. In war, innovation can rewrite the rules of engagement almost overnight. Beyond its physical impact, the destroyed bunkers, disabled tanks, and shattered fortifications, the bazooka reshaped the psychology of combat. For Japanese soldiers, it was a lesson in humility. Even lightly armed infantry could wield extraordinary destructive power. For American Marines, it was a source of confidence and responsibility, a tool that allowed courage and careful coordination to transform danger into opportunity. The weapon also left a lasting imprint on military strategy and engineering. It demonstrated that mobility and adaptability could outweigh sheer firepower, a lesson that informed post-war infantry doctrine and inspired generations of portable anti-armor weapons. From the Super Bazooka to modern shoulder-fired missiles, the M1's legacy persists in every system designed to empower a single soldier against fortified positions. Yet perhaps the most profound reflection lies in the human element. Each rocket fired demanded bravery, teamwork, and discipline. Two men, exposed to enemy fire, carried the weight of their squad's survival on their shoulders. In the tension-filled seconds before ignition, in the recoil, in the smoke and chaos, the bazooka became more than a weapon. It became a measure of resolve, a conduit through which technology amplified human will. History often remembers battles, armies, and leaders, but the bazooka reminds us that sometimes small innovations in the hands of determined individuals can alter the course of events. A weapon once ridiculed became feared, not through numbers alone, but through the combination of design, tactical application, and human courage. The M1 Bazooka's story is a lesson in respect, for ingenuity, for adaptation, and for the men who wielded it. In the vast, brutal theater of the Pacific, a simple metal tube changed the battlefield, proving that even the smallest innovations, when met with skill and bravery, can leave an enduring mark on history.